Hey guys, it's Steve here from Coils and Coins Detecting. In this video I thought I might go over what we refer to as chatter, which is what the detector is doing right now. It's just basically out of control. It's beeping erratically and spontaneously, and the target ID numbers are jumping around all over the place. You might have seen this before out in the field, and in this video I'm going to talk about why this happens and potential ways around it, ways to work with it, ways to reduce it so that you can still detect in areas with a high level of electrical interference. And there are other reasons why this can happen, and we'll talk about those too. Okay, so the first thing is to talk about the term chatter, which is a fairly common term used out in the detecting world. And what is it? Well, basically it's a general term given to a detector when it's continuously picking up signals to the point where the detector is pretty much unusable because it's just out of control. Basically, it's just picking up so many signals. There's no way to know whether you've got a true signal or a false signal. And usually what will happen when you have chatter is that the target ID numbers will jump around erratically, target tones will sound erratically and repeatedly, and just really make no sense at all. So I'm inside at the moment, as you can tell. I have the sensitivity backed right down to 10. At the moment there's not a lot of chatter because the sensitivity is so low. Occasionally I'll pick up a little bit, but as I ramp the sensitivity up, watch what happens. So it's just gone crazy, and that's because it's picking up all of the electrical interference in this space that I'm in. Electrical wires in the walls and in the ceiling, potentially under the floor, other metal objects in this space, anything else that's putting out electromagnetic interference is upsetting the detector. So the only way I can silence it in this space what I'm in right now is to reduce the sensitivity significantly. And that is one of the reasons to handle it. But just starting with what is chatter, well, you've just seen it there. That's what we call chatter. So what causes this chatter effect that you've just seen there? Well, basically chattering is caused by interference, and it's most commonly electrical interference or electromagnetic interference. And this interference is coming from sources near us or nearby. So inside here, obviously we've got electrical wires in the walls and the ceiling. We've got other appliances in this space that are giving out electromagnetic interference and electrical interference. So that's what's causing the machine to behave this way. Outside in the field, we can still see this happening, and generally it's going to be caused by things like overhead power lines and underground power lines, mobile phone towers or cell towers, also electric fences that might be in close proximity, also things like highly mineralized soil and salt water when our coil is in the water. Things like that can cause it. I've also got things like other metal detectors that are nearby. Even thunderstorms can generate electromagnetic or electrical interference. And you've also got, in this day and age, so many different wireless communication systems out there. VLF, UHF, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all these different communication systems that are all around us all of the time. Microwave interference, all kinds of things happening all of the time, and the detector's got to try and filter all that out. And if it's just too strong for the detector, you're going to hear those signals and that interference coming through. So that's essentially what's going on. The next thing that we then need to talk about was how can we control this chatter so that we can still detect in an area that we think is a good area to detect with lots of potential targets there, but we've got this chatter effect that's just stopping us from picking up on the targets. And this is the bane of our existence, really, with metal detecting in these kinds of areas. And often we can't even detect there because it's so bad. But with the technology we have in these new detectors, we can usually make changes to the machine so that we can detect in those spaces. So the first thing to consider, and the first thing that always should happen when you're detecting anywhere, is a noise cancel. And to noise cancel, we basically press the settings button. You'll see the noise cancel icon appear here, and then we press the accept reject button. It'll do a noise cancel, an automatic noise cancel for us. So the Equinox has available to it 19 different channels from -9 through to +9. And so that's the first thing to always do, because what it's going to do is scan all of those channels and find the quietest channel for the machine to operate on. So that's always going to be step number one. And you might have to do this more than once in a particular area, particularly if you're working under power lines or near underground power lines, that sort of thing. You might have to do it several times, because you might be working parallel to the lines, you might be working across them on an angle, or potentially at 90 degrees to them, and you might need to noise cancel each time you change your direction, just because of the way the interference is being directed. Another interesting thing that I read, I haven't experienced it myself, but it sounds feasible, is that at different times of the day, the amount of electrical interference coming from power lines will change. So during high use times, the interference is greatest, and during low use times, it's at its lowest. So it's always worth trying spots at different times of day, because if you're there very, very early, or maybe later in the evening, you might find the noise isn't as great, and you can then detect there quite happily. So noise cancelling is the first thing to do. The next thing to try is sensitivity adjustment, as I showed before. So we'll come out of there. So sensitivity is when you're in detect mode, the plus and minus buttons will increase and decrease sensitivity. Of course, if you decrease sensitivity, you will lose a little bit of depth. But to my mind, losing a little bit of depth is a better result than not being able to detect at all. So I'm happy to lose a little bit of depth if I can stay there and detect. So if you're getting this chattering effect happening, particularly if you're hunting at the beach, in the salt water, you're always going to be in beach 1 or beach 2 mode at the beach anyway, and beach 2 is much better at dealing with highly mineralized black sands and salt water, and that's the mode you should be in if you're in the water. But you can further reduce the chatter by reducing that sensitivity as well. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing you can do is you can frequency shift. So on the Minelab Equinox, your default is multi, so it's going to be using all of your modes: 5, 10, 15, 20 and 40. And 4 if you have the update done as well. But you can select a particular frequency to search within, and often you'll find the higher frequencies, the 20 kilohertz, 40 kilohertz signals frequencies are cleaner and they're quieter on their own. So if you pick an individual frequency and hunt in that frequency under the power lines or near the electromagnetic interference, you might find that the machine is a lot quieter. But once you pick a frequency, you want to do another noise cancel just to clean it up as much as you possibly can. Again, if you're not searching in multi-IQ or multi-mode, you might argue, well, you're going to be missing targets. Again, I'd argue you're better being able to detect in that area and miss the odd target than not being able to detect there at all. So that's another thing. Ground balancing is another thing you can do to improve the stability of the machine. Again, this would be in areas with a lot of mineralized ground or hot rocks and things like that. You might do a manual ground balance. I'm not going to go into detail here about how you do that. That might be another video, but have a look at the manual on ground balancing. That's another option. And another thing that does work, it's more a fine-tuning type thing, is to alter the recovery speed. You might find that decreasing or increasing the recovery speed in a particular area may also help a little bit with the amount of chatter that you get. So there are a few clues on how you can control chatter. So we've talked about the fact that electrical interference and electromagnetic interference can cause the machine to chatter. But there are some other physical setup type things that can cause the chatter as well, and some other maintenance type issues that can cause it. First one I'll mention is that the coil has a cover plate or a skid plate, and that is often has rubbish trapped under it. So if you detect at the beach a lot, you'll often get sand trapped in this coil area in these holes here. And if it's a mineralized sand, a black sand that you're working in, having any of that kind of material in here is going to affect your machine and can cause quite a lot of chatter. So you want to be making sure that this is nice and clean before you go detecting, or if you've been beach detecting, make sure that you clean it out. It's very easy to take off and put back on. You just take it off, empty it out, clean it out, and then just snap it back on, and away you go. So that's the first thing to consider. The next thing to consider is your cable, your coil cable. So the coil needs to come off the cable needs to come off the coil and go up the shaft with a little bit of slack, so that as your coil moves back and forth, you're not putting any strain on this part of the cable where it joins the coil. In the past, I've wrapped the cable underneath the shaft. A lot of people prefer to go over the top of the shaft, and look, I probably would go with over the shaft. I think that's the way to go. I've done it under the shaft before, but I don't think that's the best way. I think over the shaft is better. The angles are better here, and your cable's away from your coil quickly, whereas if you go under, it's closer to the coil, and that can cause some chatter. If your cable's not wrapped around your detector and not wrapped around it snugly, and it's loose, not loose like this, I mean more, let's just disconnect it and I'll show you what I mean. The machine's currently off, by the way. So if I was to have my coil like this, my cable, sorry, like this, just kind of loosely wound like this, so it's just hanging about. As I'm detecting, this cable potentially could be moving around and causing interference and causing issues with chatter, because there's an antenna effect potentially with the electromagnetic interference that's in the area. If there's a long straight run of cable, it can act like an antenna, and it can actually intensify that interference. So what you want to be doing is bringing your cable over the top of the shaft, wrapping it around the shaft snugly without being too tight, and then that will enable you to move the head of move the coil around freely, but it won't put any stress on the cable, and it won't cause the cable to wobble around, and that potentially could cause interference. So we don't want that. So we just need to make sure that that's nice and snug. Secure it with some Velcro straps, probably 2 or 3, just to keep it in place. So that's another thing to really keep an eye on when it comes to chatter. If you've got chatter and you don't believe that chatter is electrical interference or electromagnetic interference, you think it's something else, make sure that you're checking the coil cable, the underneath the skid plate, and also your connection here in the control panel. Make sure that that is snug and that it's secure and it's not loose, because if it is loose, that can cause you some grief. It can cause interference. So you just want to make sure that it's nice and tight, not over tight though. You don't want to over tighten it. You just want it finger tight, and then if that's nice and tight, it's not going to cause you any interference or any stress at all. So that's another thing to check. So just to summarize things and finish it off, most of the chattering can be dealt with in some way. You can improve on it, you can reduce it, you can work with it. So you've got overhead and underground power lines. Normally that's going to be a combination of frequency shifting or sensitivity, changing sensitivity, and of course the first thing you would do is a noise cancel, and you may even do more than one at the site while you're hunting, just to keep improving things. Electric fences that are close by, again, same sort of thing. Sensitivity adjustment, you might need to drop it a bit. You may need to try a different frequency. Certainly if you're near other detectorists and close to other detectors in the area, you might want to try a frequency shift as well. So you're operating on different frequencies, then you're not interfering with each other. Some mobile phones, cell phones, can cause interference. I'd suggest if you think your phone is the issue, just turn it off, or at least put it on airplane mode so it's not giving you any interference. Also, some pinpointers and other electrical technology like GPSs and things like that, I've never experienced interference from any of those, but some people have on different detectors, so that's always worth considering. Also, salt water, reduce your sensitivity. Search in beach 2. Mineralised soil at the beach, same thing. Nearby large metal objects can cause falsing. Things like your digging tool, if you've got a spade that's a bit too close, even if it's a bit of a running joke that people dig deep holes because they're wearing steel cap boots and things like that. Look, if you're wearing metal on your shoes, that could affect the detector. It could actually give a signal when there isn't one there, so just keep that in mind. Again, you're swinging away from your feet generally, so unlikely to be an issue, but just keep it in mind. Thunderstorms in the area can cause machine to false and can cause interference. I've experienced that before. An area where there's a lot of communication systems, so things like, as I said, cell towers or radio broadcasting towers, even Bluetooth and Wi-Fi hotspots, things like that. If you're near those sorts of things, that can definitely cause issues. Again, try a frequency shift. Try your noise cancelling first, though, and then you may need to reduce your sensitivity to resolve those issues. As we mentioned, foreign material in the skid plate. Under the skid plate, make sure there's nothing there. Make sure your coil cable is wrapped properly around the shaft and there's a good connection. And sometimes people have said they've found that if they're just done everything and they still can't get a decent result, they've tried running their cable straight up the coil for about 30 centimetres and then started to wrap it, or even a little bit higher, and that can reduce the antenna effect that I mentioned. So that's even worth a shot if nothing else is working for you. So that's a bit of an idea. I mean, I don't profess to be an expert in any of this. This is just some of the things that I've discovered, some of the things I've read about, and some of the things I've actually tried myself that have worked for me. So hopefully there's some ideas here that'll work for you. If you think the video's been helpful, please leave a like. I'd be really happy if you guys would subscribe so that I can share new video content with you. Share it with your friends if you think it's useful to other people. And look, I look forward to catching up with you on the next video. So good luck with your hunting, guys, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.